Hi everyone, welcome to our press conference reaction ahead of tomorrow's game against PSV, joined by Euan Robertson, who's still at Ibrox, having heard from Michael Beale and Cyril Dessers. Is going to have a quick 15-minute chat before PSV's press conference. Stolen 15 minutes of Euan's time to talk through the press conference today. Euan, firstly, how are you getting on? And another long press conference, almost 20 minutes today, was it? It must be European season when it's that long.
Yeah, I think Michael Beale was about 18.5 minutes in total, which is great for the transfer later on. But it was a really action-packed press conference. There wasn't a lot of talk about PSV and a couple of other issues as well. Giannis Hagi, Giannis Hagi, and the Malik Tillman situation, which was quite interesting as well.
Yeah, I'm getting some feedback from your audio, Euan, so I'll maybe let you perhaps just take your headphones out while I read through some of the comments from today. Lots of activity as would be expected. A lot of people asking about Giannis Hagi, obviously one of the main talking points from the press conference. We'll get on to Michael Beale's comments about him. Malik Tillman as well, who returns to Ibrox, not in the capacity that a lot of people, myself included, would have wanted back for PSV. He is in PSV's squad for the game. And of course, Giannis Hagi is not in the squad alongside Bridvan Yilmaz, who also drops out, Ravi Matondo, and Ben Davies back in. Euan, let's start with Giannis Hagi. The big talking point going into the press conference. He had a press conference at the weekend where, shall we say, he shared his frustration in not playing more football. Bring us up to speed with what Michael Beale said on that and your kind of reaction to it.
Yeah, I think Giannis spoke his mind, didn't he, on Saturday. He was obviously quite emotional still in the aftermath of the game. He's clearly quite frustrated about his game time. Michael Beale was asked about Giannis' omission from the squad. Can you hear me okay, Josh?
Yeah. All good.
So Michael was asked about Giannis' omission from the squad. I don't think it's necessarily related to his comments after Saturday. I actually think that Ravi Matondo is just better suited to these European ties, especially in the away leg. You think if they just have to sit in and play on the counter, then Matondo's pace is more of an asset than Giannis Hagi. Michael Beale said he had no problems with Giannis at all on a personal level. He talked about the relationship as manager and player, said they have a really strong relationship. Talked about his rehab last season. I think the most interesting thing that people may be looking over is that Michael Beale said he don't think he's at the physical fitness levels that he needs to be at.
Yeah.
Giannis obviously came out at the weekend and said he feels he's fitter than he's ever been. So I think that's going to get lost a little bit in the fact that he talked about that Giannis could still leave the club in the next couple of weeks, and also that his agent and Giannis have been having conversations in the background that Giannis wants to play, and Michael Beale agrees that he needs to play, and it doesn't look like that's going to be at Ibrox. But I found the comments about the fitness levels quite interesting, given that Giannis was saying he feels as fit as ever has been on Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, PSV is a big test. You and Rangers faced them last year. There's probably an argument that they're as strong, if not a bit stronger, for Rangers. Obviously, they still remain in this kind of element of the unknown where it's hard to kind of predict tomorrow's team. We'll get into that in tomorrow's morning briefing specifically. But, I mean, what did Michael Beale say about the challenge overall? And I believe also talking about the fact that he expects another incoming, but he doesn't expect that incoming to be dependent on whether Rangers make it through to the Champions League group stage over the next week.
Yeah, I mean, he called PSV a formidable opponent. He says, a fantastic team, and probably as good as any side that the Rangers will face this season. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a very difficult game, isn't it? Michael Beale said how important it is to get off to a really good start and then get a good result in the home leg before going to Holland next week for the return leg. He talked about the kind of changes since Peter Bosz took over. Obviously, it was Ruud van Nistelrooy was in charge, wasn't it?
It was,
this time last season. So there's obviously been a lot of change in style there. He talked about how Rangers have obviously changed as well from Giovanni Van Bronckhorst to his style, and they've got a good team and they've invested heavily in the squad. I think Michael Beale believes that their strengths lie in the defensive areas rather than the defensive areas. I think that's quite an interesting point to pick up on as well, because Cyril Dessers was asked about PSV's perceived weakness at the back as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a members video on PSV today, the kind of scout report on them, and a long piece on the website. I've watched about 3 or 4 of their games so far. So if you want a bit more insight into how they play, their key players, those weaknesses that Rangers might be able to exploit, then you can check that out on the website. You want to talk about transfers, because people always want to talk about transfers. Michael Beale said that he expects 1 or 2 outgoings. I think you still look at the squad, and the likes of Glenn Kamara, for example, kind of that name crops up when the topic is raised. The topic of another incoming, I think, is interesting. It's encouraging. I think there's probably 2 areas that Rangers probably still need or could add. One of which is, and I think this is where Rabbi Matondo comes into it. I know he's promising and bright at the weekend, but do they have that technical ball carrier with pace over distance? I know they've got Lammers, who's very two-footed and can take on his player, but he's perhaps not got burning pace over distance. Sima's going to carry you up the pitch, but is he going to break down a block by dribbling past 3 players? So you've got that type of player. You maybe still as well, depends what happens in the defensive areas. Ben Davies obviously comes back into the squad for tomorrow, but what did you take away from what Beale said about the rest of the transfer business in his press conference today?
Yeah, it's what's expected, really. I think it's interesting that he mentioned that his transfer business doesn't rely on the outcome of these 2 games. Making the Champions League isn't fundamental to how much money the Beale gets to spend in the remainder of the window. He talked about there being more players going out, and then I think he talked about 2 players going out and possibly 1 coming in. I think it'll be more than that. I think look at Glenn Kamara, Giannis Hagi, Scott Wright, and a couple of others that could leave during this window. And talked about we can get 1 player who can come in and make the starting 11 stronger, which I found interesting. It's not a player to come in and be a backup or a squad player. He specifically mentioned that a player would make the starting 11 stronger. So he wants quality over quantity at this time in the window. And you look at what position could that be in? Could that be at left centre back? Could that be 1 more attacking player? I think those are the 2 areas of the pitch that you'd expect business. And I think the business of Rangers will do will be more dependent on players that go out rather than necessarily beating PSV or going out at this stage of the window, because I think a number of players could still leave, and then obviously you need to replace them in the squad, and Michael Beale wants to bring in a quality player to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's speak before you go into PSV's press conference about a PSV player, Malik Tillman. Obviously, he was someone that I spoke about a lot last season because I thought he was brilliant for Rangers, but he will be in the opposition's lineup tomorrow. Quite a strange paradox to this time last year when he played a big role in beating PSV to get Rangers into the Champions League. And I guess Beale giving some insight into the transfer, why it happened, what happened with Bayern, obviously the clause that was in place before he came back to the club, wishing the player well, but not wishing him well tomorrow. Is that summarise what he said about it, Euan?
Yeah, perfectly. You've got everything there. That's what he said. We also had the story earlier in the summer. We broke the story about Malik Tillman when we come back to Rangers, and we had all the detail in there. So maybe share that on our pages and later talk about the transfer. Michael Beale alluded to that. He said the agreement was in place before I came to the club in terms of how that was structured. Rangers stuck to their side of the agreement, but frustratingly for him, Bayern Munich activated their kind of buyback option, and he went back to Bayern. He subsequently went out to PSV. He said Michael Beale said he's a fantastic player. I spoke to him a lot over the summer, and then obviously wished him well in his future career, but not tomorrow night or the return leg next week. So Malik Tillman no full feature at Ibrox tomorrow, but I expect him to certainly feature over the 2 legs at some point. It'll be interesting to see what reception he gets if he comes on tomorrow. But I imagine it'll be quite a positive one.
Yeah, light applause from me. Just finally, Euan, I mean, we're going to have the teams out in the newsletter today. We'll have the morning briefing tomorrow. Myself, Derek and Stevie looking ahead to the big game. Loads of coverage coming on the website. We've also got the scout report as mentioned. If you want to watch that in video form, you can do so by joining the members channel. Anything else to note, Euan, I guess, in the press conference from that 18 minutes that stands out before we let you go and speak to Peter Bosch?
Yeah, I thought there was a really interesting point I think you mentioned about transfer business in general. He talked about the board investment from January downwards has been about 13 or 14 million into the playing squad, and he highlighted 3 players in Raskin, Cifuentes and Cantwell. I think 3 players that the majority of fans have been really, really happy with, costing a combined £2 million, and talking about how Rangers have done good business in the market, which I thought was quite interesting. That we specifically mentioned those players with those prices. You look at it, Raskin, Cifuentes and Cantwell for £2 million is excellent business. Certainly Cantwell and Raskin since January have been 2 of Rangers' best players, if not the 2 best players. And Cifuentes has came in and he's looked really, really good so far as well. So it shows you there's value in the market, doesn't it? It's not always the big transfer fees you get down in England, but if you scout wisely and recruit well, you can find these gems for reasonably good prices.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Euan, we'll
And
let you go.
Ridvan as well, Josh.
Ridvan as well, yes.
He won't be in the squad tomorrow, but I think Michael Beale said he's the only Rangers player not currently training, and he'll be back. I think he'll be back to training after this game, but the weekend will come too soon for him. So obviously you've got Ross County weekend and PSV and Celtic, so quite a few big games coming up. I don't know if he'd flown back into any of those, given he's been out for a wee while now. So that's updating on Ridvan Yilmaz, and obviously he's one of the players to drop out the squad with Ben Davies coming back in, just because he probably won't be fit for either tie.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Well, Euan, thanks for your time. I'm going to let you go and take in the PSV press conference now. You can watch all the press conferences on our YouTube channel at the moment. You'll be able to read the full transcript soon on the website as well. Lots of coverage over there to keep you occupied until tomorrow. We'll be back with the morning briefing for a big match preview tomorrow morning. Until then, thanks very much for joining me. Thanks to Euan for dialing in, and we'll speak to you soon.